So, hello, and welcome to this webinar where we're going to be talking about data as a competitive advantage for biotechs, as opposed to just a chore. And really grateful to have you here today. My name is Bernie Lee. I'm a product manager here at LabKey Software for our biologics limbs in particular. So today, my aim is to demonstrate how effective data management through structured systems can support all of your organizational goals, really maximize the value of your data, and minimize a lot of risks against you and your company, your endeavor. We at LabKey have been supporting these practices for over 20 years across quite a few different industries. And that has really taught us a lot of valuable lessons and given us some good stories and insights into what this looks like in practice. So I want to start off with a couple of those stories that kind of tell this tale in a slightly different way. So first, I want to talk about the startup, and I'm hoping that most of you can ultimately see yourselves in one of these categories in general. But we work with a lot of groups that are really just getting started. They're early on in their process. They're working on a first product, and their hope is to, first of all, be successful in that endeavor, and then get it to market, or get it sold, licensed, or seek additional rounds of funding from investors. And so, they're relatively small. They don't have a lot of data. It's not necessarily very complex. Most people in this condition don't feel like they need any kind of system to help them stay organized on these things. They consider the potential additional labor required to, stay organized with their data, something that could potentially slow them down. Now, the problem with that is that at some point, if you're even remotely successful, there will be people that need to do due diligence on what they're investing in or what they're purchasing, or you'll need to compile or for approval from regulatory agencies. And your ability to review that information, compile that information, share that information, and ultimately make use of it again in the future may be greatly dependent upon how organized, predictable, structured the data is that you've worked so hard and fast to capture and prepare. Then there's larger organizations, kind of a different perspective. Let's say that you're a multinational biopharma. You have different divisions performing different actions, and there are market changes or strategic changes, and you want to purchase an entire division or product from one of those startups, or it's different. You want to reorganize so that you have some whole division, product, or facility that you want to sell or close, and you have to do something similar to the startup. You have this whole facility that you are selling to a different organization, as well as all of the data and intellectual property that comes with it. Now, there's a whole industries built up around mergers and acquisitions, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's extremely difficult. It can be excruciating, in fact, but you can make it a whole lot less difficult and painful if you are organized in such a way that you can say, yeah, here's all of the information, all of the data associated with the thing that we are selling you. Ready, set, go. And the rest of it is more about the practical side, the human side, the legal side. That's certainly preferential to then taking, probably months of your scientists' time to recompile all of the critical information, draw distinctions between what is supposed to be transferred and what is supposed to be kept within. And the third story is more of an internal one. These are the people, the groups that are really seeking efficiency. So when it comes to working in between teams, handing off information, handing off data, handing off requests for work, things like that. That can be either easy, or it can be really slow, rough, with a lot of email back and forths, and can also ultimately produce friction, require repeated work, and can result in either data lost, confused, or simply hiding somewhere in somebody's email, which can lead to all sorts of other problems. There's also report generation. Very, very frequently, you have scientists that are working diligently on their various projects, and then some manager or senior VP of research is interested in seeing, exploring what the state of a particular project, the progress on developing some particular molecule, and in order for them to see that, you have to stop what you're doing. Sometimes multiple scientists have to stop what they're doing, and go digging around for the proper information and formulate it in a way that's consumable by those non-scientists. When your data is well organized and structured, that becomes easy. It becomes trivial, something you don't really have to think about. Whereas if you have it in a bunch of disparate spreadsheets, there's a lot of work ahead of you. Same thing basically goes for project planning. If you want to know the state of things and be able to make decisions about your data, it's got to be organized in a way that you can do that. If you have that information distributed across spreadsheets, sometimes with different names for things, that becomes extremely hard. So data structuring isn't just a technical detail. It really can be a competitive advantage. So by connecting your scientific efforts with reliable, accessible data, you can unlock a real cascade of benefits. As I said before on the project planning, you can make faster go no go decisions about your latest foray into some particular candidate, for example. You can, and that can ultimately result in many fewer costly delays. You can see many fewer duplicated experiments, saving lots of valuable resources. And as I said just a minute ago, those handoffs between teams become a lot easier, and your organization gains greater readiness for partnerships and scale. So while organizing and structuring your data requires effort, there's no question about that. Since that is not the default practice of scientists, having been one, having been educated as one, our default is not to use either sophisticated or unsophisticated systems that keep our data well structured and organized. Our default is to do what we know. But data structuring is not a cost driver, it's a competitive multiplier. It offers both short and long-term benefits. Since I have now mentioned this several times, let's talk briefly about what I actually mean by structured data. It's not just about having neat columns in your spreadsheets and agreeing between teams what to name things. It's about consistently capturing relationships, context, and meaning in a way that enables rapid understanding, search, integration with other information, and reporting. This is essentially what I was saying. I was saying a couple of slides ago about having your data organized and structured and richly annotated so that both you in the future and people that aren't necessarily experts in the particular field of science that you might be working can understand it, be brought along, help with the decision making. So this includes standardized formats and fields, creating relational connections between different types of data. You're not just tracking the individual data points, you're actively connecting them in a way that tells a useful story. It also involves thorough metadata and context capture. And by doing this, it also enables things like good auditing practices and some versioning of these things, allowing you to troubleshoot and solve problems after you've captured the information. And then, in addition, it makes your data, ready for future innovations, as well as future applications like, making your data machine readable. Yeah. So structured data is your pathway to future-proofing your operations. So no matter how you use the data in the future, having an organized, consistent, and well-structured will save you an almost unbelievable amount of time. You'll not have to spend your limited resources digging, reorganizing, and probably repeating work. Some of the more fun possible future uses enabled by this are things like machine learning and AI readiness, as well as seamless platform integration, and as well as scalability. For example, if you want to implement some kind of digital twin to help reduce your bioreactor runs, something that can help you from some sequence that you'd like to a set of sequences you'd like to produce into some molecule, and you're not necessarily sure what the optimal conditions are. If you have your data well structured and metadata rich, then you can actually do that. Whereas if it's distributed all around in all kinds of places, it's actually impossible until you go and take the effort to reorganize it. I already talked about the improved auditability, but when it comes to things like regulated environments, this kind of structuring is a requirement for compliance. So if you are ever going to foray into such endeavors, this is really important. And as we often emphasize, the decisions you make today will affect your ability to scale tomorrow. If you invest in structuring your data now, then you're building a resilient foundation for future innovation and growth. That's another way of saying, like in that startup example that I shared at the very beginning, you really want to do this before you need it. While you don't need it, you can actually do it. And as you begin to grow and scale, you eventually get to the point where it's almost impossible to reorganize everything such that you can be successful. You want to do this before you have problems. Just put that foundation in place and get going. All right. There are some pitfalls here of not doing it. It's not just a good thing to do it. There are some problems if you don't do it. So an over-reliance on spreadsheets, and I'll add humans. For example, we have worked with people with one group that had a team working with, I don't remember the exact number, but it was 10 plus spreadsheets. And part of their operation included outsourcing some of the production of their molecules. And they found inconsistencies in sequence and sample names, in the sequence and sample IDs that they were dealing with. And so they got their data and their material back from the group that was trying to produce this stuff for them, and they realized they didn't know which data went with which sequence. And there were sample IDs in between the sequence and the data, and it ultimately required a couple of weeks of reconciliation and rework, and a lot of people at both organizations, and it was very costly. So when you have centralized platforms, you can really prevent a lot of that kind of confusion. You can use consistent naming and ensure that everyone has access to the latest data. Similarly, we've worked with a group that had kind of fragmented sample and plate tracking. So they're going through the various operations, and this biotech was cumulatively spending 100+ hours a month creating plate layouts in spreadsheets, copying and pasting raw plate reads with onto those plate layouts, reorganizing and realigning those things with Excel macros and human, copy paste, drag and drop kind of stuff. And in addition to having to, align information about the initial stock samples that they had and were tracking with various downstream plate locations. If you've experienced this before, it gets very, very complicated. And having a digital sample tracking and like location lineage system can really clean that up a lot, and remove all of the human elements and variables that make it just a nightmare. Okay, and one of the third ones that I wanted to call out is this data siloing problem. This is extremely common. It's very natural if you simply let your teams grow and specialize. What ultimately happens is you end up with data of one type in one place with one team, and possibly related data from another team in an entirely different place, entirely different form. So we work with some multinational biopharmas, and they came to us basically saying, we get asked fairly regularly for reports on this or that. And every time one of those requests come in, basically our whole team has to go and find all the different spreadsheets, data files, and reconcile them and compile those into a report for those various decision makers. It's extremely time consuming. It's annoying. Sometimes when we can't find things, we repeat work. And what they need, what they want, what they ultimately got was a centralized integrated system that connects their data, so that when somebody says, I want all the information that you have on this particular molecule or the state of this project, we just click into that project and we look at it and we say, here it is. Okay, so how do we build this foundation early? The key is to start small, but think big. Have the whole picture in mind, but begin by mapping your most critical workflows, your key entities, the entities around which your operations move. Whether that's some set of sequences or molecules or clones or whatever it is, your key samples and your results. It's essential to get your data right at the bench level. That's where it's raw, it's unmanipulated, and that's where you can, essentially ensure accuracy. And then as you grow, you really want to avoid what we call technical debt, which essentially, in this case, means choose a system that can scale with you, not something that as you change, as you grow, you have to revolutionize. This next one can be a little bit tricky. So while it's important to structure your data from here on out, it's also quite important to come up with a plan for your historical data. It is a valuable asset, but maybe not all of it. And this is one of the reasons why doing this earlier rather than later becomes really important, because if you've only been operating for a year, you have some data, but it's not an overwhelming amount. Whereas if you go 10 years and you've grown to dozens and dozens of people that are involved, figuring out where all of that historical data is and what to do with it can be virtually impossible. And most importantly, start now with this, because your future self will definitely thank you. Okay, so building systems versus buying systems. When you go and look at existing on the market systems, you will find huge variation in what they do, how they function, what they're oriented towards, how expensive they are, what it takes to implement them and support them. It can be daunting, confusing. You can feel like you are trying to, you're at at a car dealership where they're just trying to get you to buy whatever they can, whatever the most expensive thing is. And you don't have to do that. You could build your own. There are lots of software engineers out there that would be delighted to help you. However, it's not as simple as anybody would like, frankly. When you are exploring whether to build or buy a system, you are going to want to consider factors like your current needs, future growth, existing information architecture, or infrastructure, whatever word you want to use. And to begin to understand, what resources are required both to buy or build these systems. Building a system requires significant internal resources and expertise. If you ever want to feel very quickly like you made the wrong career decision, explore how expensive a quality software engineer with expertise in science is. Very, very quickly, you will realize just how expensive this is going to be. Okay. You're also going to want to carefully assess the long-term costs associated with each option, since even if you could get something that's useful to you built quickly, there are significant long-term maintenance and update costs. And of course, that's different for when you buy a system. You probably will just have some ongoing license cost. Consider scalability needs to accommodate future workflows, data volumes, and user growth. You are the only one that has any clue, the direction of your institution, your organization, what scientific things you are going to care about. We can't know that for you, but you've got to consider what changes are coming and whether having to build more for those changes is better or not. I certainly recommend, in general, if you can do it, to purchase an off-the-shelf solution for a number of reasons. I actually think in the long term, sometimes in the short term as well, but certainly in the long term, it's actually a lot less costly. You can almost always have much more rapid deployment, as well as immediate access to vendor support. Oh yes, and often the best option is an off-the-shelf system that can be configured or customized to match your workflows. No one expects an absolute perfect fit. If you find a system that feels pretty good but is very rigid, you will eventually press against those barriers. So what should you look for in a first system to ensure that you're building this structured data foundation effectively? First, look for something that actually matches your workflow, but is flexible enough to be adapted to what makes you you. Don't choose something that forces you into that rigid box. Usability is critical. If it's not intuitive or easily learnable, your team won't adopt it. So while you may be imposing this change upon your scientists who don't necessarily appreciate it in the near term, getting them involved in the decision, in the assessment of some of these options will truly serve you. Not only having their buy-in, but helping them actually make use of the system, because you can throw whatever resources you want at a system. If they don't adopt it, then you still have the same problem you started with. Look for as much functional coverage as possible for your operations, and and finally extensibility. The ability to grow and integrate with other platforms as your needs evolve. We encourage you to explore solutions that offer things like guided trials, like LabKey. We are very happy to help you explore, how our systems could potentially serve you without the sales pressure. So with that, I'm gonna finish with a quick plug, and then if anybody has any questions, happy to hang out and chat a little bit. So as I said, I'm the product manager for our biologics LIMS. So it's a purpose-built for biologics. But that's not actually our only product. We have a number of others of different levels and purposes. But our biologic LIMS is intended to streamline workflows across discovery, development, analytics, and more. Its purpose is to facilitate the structuring and organization and consistency of your data, using a number of tools that you can kind of see descriptions of in this wheel to the right here: sample management and bioregistry, entity registration, assay data management, plates, built-in ELN, workflows to support your processes, and some analytics and reporting kind of stuff. By structuring it, again, it's AI machine learning ready, or just whatever your general data science application might be, whatever your broad scale analysis might be. But we help you capture consistent searchable data across teams, directly from instruments, to enable better decision making and downstream system integration. And we are very flexible. You can very easily configure, your instance of LabKey to match your evolving workflows, with continuous support from us, and in a way that can scale with your teams and your changing research needs. So I'd love to show you that sometime if you're very interested. So keep an eye out in your email for a demo link. We'd love to have a conversation with you about what your organization does, how we might be able to help, and we also benefit greatly from simply hearing about your needs. It helps us shape our product offerings. So with that, thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, I hope we can talk again in the future.